Carbon is the basic building block of life, and these unique atoms are found everywhere on Earth. Carbon makes up the Earth's plants and animals, and carbon is also stored in the ocean, the atmosphere, and the crust of the planet. A carbon atom could spend millions of years moving through the Earth in a complex cycle. Understanding the carbon cycle and how it is changing is key to understanding Earth's changing climate. On land, plants remove carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. Animals eat plants and either breathe out carbon or it moves up the food chain. When plants and animals die and decay, they transfer carbon back to the soil. Moving offshore, the ocean holds huge amounts of carbon, about 50 times the amount we find in the atmosphere.
The ocean is sometimes called a carbon sink, meaning that it absorbs or takes up carbon from the atmosphere. It takes up carbon through physical and biological processes.
At the ocean's surface, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolves into the water. Tiny marine plants called phytoplankton use this carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Phytoplankton are the base of the marine food web. After animals eat the plants, they breathe out the carbon or pass it up the food chain. Sometimes phytoplankton die, decompose, and are recycled in the surface waters. Phytoplankton can also sink to the ocean floor, carrying carbon as they descend. Over long time scales, this process has made the ocean floor the largest reservoir of carbon on the planet. Most of the ocean's nutrients are in cold, deep water. In a process called upwelling, currents bring nutrients and carbon up to the surface. Carbon can then be released as a gas back into the atmosphere, continuing the carbon cycle. By cycling huge amounts of carbon, the ocean helps regulate climate.
So when you think of climate, you don't often think of the ocean. Climate, you think of, is it going to be hotter this year? Is it going to be colder this year? But the oceans are actually a great regulator or controller of the Earth's climate. And they even are controlling how much carbon is in the atmosphere, which can slow down how quickly climate change is occurring.
At the most basic level, the balance between incoming sunlight and outgoing heat determines the Earth's climate. Greenhouse gases act like a blanket and trap heat in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. In the past 2 centuries, humans have increased atmospheric carbon dioxide by more than 30% by burning fossil fuels and cutting down forests. The Earth has not experienced carbon dioxide levels this high for the past several million years. Researchers are learning that future climate change will depend on carbon levels in the land, in the atmosphere, and in the sea, and how these levels respond to human disturbance. About 1/3 of all human-generated carbon emissions has dissolved in the ocean. More than 80% of Earth's added heat is now stored in the ocean.
In the future, as the planet gets warmer, the water's going to warm up, and warm water can hold less carbon than cold water. The other thing is, on a warmer planet, some of the currents are going to slow down, and so we might not be forming as much of this cold, deep water. So we won't be able to transport carbon into the deep sea. So on the whole, the ocean's going to become less effective at removing carbon from the atmosphere.
Throughout most of Earth's ocean, the warmer water, weaker circulation, and new temperature gradients that result from climate change will impact marine life and ecosystems. These changes affect the ocean's ability to store carbon. Increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere impacts marine life in other ways.
As the ocean absorbs more carbon dioxide, it becomes more acidic, and this can be a threat to some of the organisms that live inside the ocean.
As Earth's climate continues to change, how will researchers monitor something as big as the ocean and something as complex as the carbon cycle? NASA Earth-observing satellites give scientists the big picture view of our home planet. Varied satellites help researchers detect changes in ocean climate and ecology over time, providing vital insight into the health of our home planet.
Oxygen cycle. Oxygen cycle, one of the biogeochemical cycles, is closely linked to carbon cycle. The major sources of oxygen are atmosphere and hydrosphere. Approximately 21% of atmosphere is composed of free oxygen, whereas oxygen is seen in the combined form as water in hydrosphere. The importance of oxygen for sustaining life can be understood from the fact that all living things need oxygen for breathing and respiration. Burning also requires oxygen. We will discuss how such a vital gas is maintained in nature. Photosynthesis and respiration are complementary processes in the living world. Photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide and water as raw materials to produce sugars and other organic molecules. These molecules in turn serve as food for other organisms. All of these organisms carry out respiration, a process that uses oxygen to release carbon dioxide from the same carbon atoms contained in the food. Thus, one process uses carbon dioxide and releases oxygen, whereas the other uses oxygen and releases carbon dioxide. These are the two major processes that help to maintain the balance of oxygen in the atmosphere. Another process that adds oxygen to the atmosphere is photodissociation of water vapor. Being a very reactive gas, during its cycling, oxygen combines with various other elements to different solid or gaseous compounds. Oxides of nitrogen and elements like iron, carbonates of calcium, etc. are formed like this. These compounds once again may enter into other biogeochemical cycles. Some oxygen molecules will get converted to ozone, and the reverse will also take place. Observe the given illustration to understand oxygen cycle in its totality. Nitrogen cycle.
What is nitrogen used for? Nitrogen forms an essential part of amino acids which make up proteins and DNA. Nitrogen is essential for all living cells. Air, which is about 78% nitrogen gas, is the major reservoir of nitrogen. But most organisms cannot use nitrogen in this form. Plants must secure their nitrogen in fixed form, that is, incorporated in compounds such as nitrate ions, NO3 negative, ammonia NH3, urea NH2, 2CO. Animals secure their nitrogen and all other compounds from plants or animals that have fed on plants. What is nitrogen cycle? 4 processes that participate in the cycling of nitrogen through the biosphere constitute the nitrogen cycle. They are nitrogen fixation, decay, nitrification, denitrification. Role of microorganisms. Microorganisms play a major role in all 4 processes of the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen fixation. The nitrogen molecule N2 is quite inert. To break it apart so that its atoms can combine with other atoms requires the input of substantial amounts of energy. 3 processes are responsible for most of the nitrogen fixation in the biosphere. Atmospheric fixation by lightning, biological fixation by certain microbes, alone or in a symbiotic relationship with plants. Industrial fixation. Atmospheric fixation. The enormous energy of lightning breaks nitrogen molecules and enables their atoms to combine with oxygen in the air, forming nitrogen oxides. These dissolve in rain, forming nitrates that are carried to the earth. Atmospheric nitrogen fixation probably contributes some 5 to 8% of the total nitrogen fixed. Industrial fixation. Under great pressure at a temperature of 600 degrees centigrade and with the use of a catalyst, atmospheric nitrogen and hydrogen, usually derived from natural gas or petroleum, can be combined to form ammonia, NH3. Ammonia can be used directly as a fertilizer, but most of it is further processed to urea and ammonium nitrate, NH4NO3. Biological fixation. The ability to fix nitrogen is found only in certain bacteria. Some live in a symbiotic relationship with plants of the legume family. Example, soybeans, alfalfa. Some establish symbiotic relationships with plants other than legumes. Example, alders. Some nitrogen-fixing bacteria live free in the soil. Nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria are essential for maintaining the fertility of semi-aquatic environments like rice paddies. Biological nitrogen fixation requires a complex set of enzymes and a huge expenditure of ATP. Although the first stable product of the process is ammonia, this is quickly incorporated into protein and other organic nitrogen compounds. Decay. The proteins made by plants enter and pass through food webs just as carbohydrates do. At each trophic level, their metabolism produces organic nitrogen compounds that return to the environment, chiefly in excretions. The final beneficiaries of these materials are microorganisms of decay. They break down the molecules in excretions and dead organisms into ammonia. Nitrification. Ammonia can be taken up directly by plants, usually through their roots. However, most of the ammonia produced by decay is converted into nitrates. This is accomplished in two steps. Bacteria of the genus Nitrosomonas oxidize NH3 to nitrites, NO2 negative. Bacteria of the genus Nitrobacter oxidize the nitrites to nitrates, NO3 negative. These two groups or autotrophic bacteria are called nitrifying bacteria. Through their activities, which supply them with all their energy needs, nitrogen is made available to the roots of plants. Many legumes, in addition to fixing atmospheric nitrogen, also perform nitrification, converting some of their organic nitrogen to nitrites and nitrates. These reach the soil when they shed their leaves. Denitrification. The three processes, nitrogen fixation, nitrification, and decay described so far, remove nitrogen from the atmosphere and pass it through ecosystems. Denitrification reduces nitrates to nitrogen gas, thus replenishing the atmosphere. Once again, bacteria are the agents. They live deep in soil and in aquatic sediments where conditions are anaerobic. They use nitrates as an alternative to oxygen for the final electron acceptor in their respiration. Thus they close the nitrogen cycle. Click on the summary button to view the role of microorganisms in nitrogen cycle. Microorganisms involved in nitrogen cycle. When we cause nitrogen overload in an ecosystem, there are many drastic effects. These are enlisted here.